I think it's important to sort of get that foundation, but ultimately, like, play what is going to excite you and keep you interested. If you don't want to play Led Zeppelin bass lines, then you don't have to necessarily do that.
Hi, and welcome to ForBassPlayersOnly.com. I'm John Liebman, founder and first baseman. If you've ever wanted to learn bass, but you think you can't because you're too old or your body won't let you or some other reason like that, you should know that right now there are thousands of people inside the For Bass Players Only community. A lot of them of the silver-aged vintage, and they are learning bass, having the time of their life playing music that they love. You should come join them and experience that incredible transformation for yourself. As I always say, you're never too old to groove, so let's play bass. My guest this week is Jake Serek. Jake is an accomplished bassist, an independent bass builder, and founder and owner of Serek Basses in Chicago. While he was a member of the rock band Bad City, Jake experienced touring life along such acts as Smashing Pumpkins, Kiss, and Slash. And he honed his bass skills as a luthier with elite instrument builders like Lakeland and Third Coast Guitar Repair. Jake continues to make custom basses full-time now at Serek Basses. This is his first time on For Bass Players Only. Welcome, Jake. It's great to have you.
Thanks for having me. It's nice to meet you. It's nice to be here.
Well, thank you very much. Yeah,
Yeah.
obviously, we want to talk about you and Serek Basses and your gorgeous equipment that you make, but I
Sure.
wanted to give the people a chance to find out a little more about you and your musical upbringing. How, were you surrounded by music? Did you come from a musical family, brothers and sisters, records playing, parents taking you to
Yeah.
concerts? How did that all come to be?
For sure. Yeah. There's definitely some musicians in the family. Actually, my dad is a bit of a family genealogist these days, and he's recently dug up some really cool info on my great grandfather, who was a traveling violinist. And he recently discovered that he played in a quartet amongst other bands, but he traveled to South America and played at the wedding of the owner of D'Angostura Bitters. Bitters that you make an old fashioned with.
Yeah.
Everyone, I'm sure, if you've ever had a cocktail, you might have had bitters before. So he just found this letter from one of my uncles, kind of cataloging this trip and how they traveled all around the world playing their instruments. So it's definitely in the bloodline, and I thought that was pretty cool. And I actually have my great grandfather's violin with me as well. So I've plan to do a little repair on that at some point and get it back into playing condition. Not that I can play the violin, but so that's pretty cool. Definitely grew up listening to lots of different types of music. My dad turned me on to all sorts of cool stuff. Was always buying me CDs. Child of the 90s. It was CDs for me. For Christmas and birthdays and the like. And then I had my first taste of being a musician when I picked up the trumpet in about fourth grade. And I stuck through all the way through high school playing trumpet and tuba in the marching bands, symphonic bands, jazz bands, all that kind of stuff. So I was kind of the band geek, as it were. And then once I started getting into low brass on the tuba, I was reading bass clef. I was taking some guitar lessons at the time, but it wasn't really going anywhere for me. So I kind of figured, hey, maybe I'll try out the bass. I remember being in the car one day with my mom, listening to the radio, and I was humming along to a song. And she said, anytime you're humming along to songs, it's always the bass line. Did you ever notice that? And kind of just like a light bulb went off. I'm like, all
I
right.
used to
So,
do that too. That's so fun.
so so naturally I was kind of already working my way down from the treble clef to the bass clef in the brass side of things. So then I picked up a bass guitar. I started playing in the jazz band and the show choir in high school, and then met some like-minded fellows and started some garage bands, and just went from there. So
Let's back up a little bit. You
yeah.
said child of the '90s. Your dad bought you CDs. What kind of stuff was he exposing you to? What were you listening to in those?
Yeah, I mean, all the classic rock, the Who and Boston and all the stuff you hear on the classic rock radio stations time and time again. I also have distinct memories of my mom had a tower of cassette tapes in her bedroom. And I remember sneaking in there and kind of just stealing random cassette tapes. And the first three that really I can remember as a young kid, probably somewhere around like 6 or 7 years old, really like playing over and over again was Electric Light Orchestra's definitive, greatest hits,
Yeah.
the Carpenters' greatest hits, and then Pink Floyd, The Wall, which was
Okay.
pretty heavy album for a young kid. Probably gave me some nightmares for a few years there, but though so I've always just really enjoyed like a wide variety of music. And then my dad also turned me on to some country, John Prine and Garth Brooks, Randy Travis, like sort of that 90s country, but then also, further back into the 60s and 70s as well. And so just, all over the place.
There were two female voices that stand out to me as just far and away my absolute favorites.
Mm-hmm.
One of them was Astrud Gilberto, who played with Joe Beam, sang on Girl with Ipanema and all those classic
Oh yeah. Yeah.
awesome
Yeah.
records. The other is Karen Carpenter.
Karen Carpenter.
I
Yeah.
love Karen Carpenter's voice. Oh my.
Yep. One of the greats.
What about listening to the bass? You were humming along with it subconsciously. By the way, your mother must have had some kind of musical aptitude also to recognize that you were singing the bass. But
Yeah, she played a little bit of piano growing up, and we had an upright piano that was always a little bit out of tune in the house, and she would play and all that. So definitely.
but did you
Uh,
start listening and I mean really paying attention to the bass on these records when you first discovered the instrument, or you first
yeah,
discovered the low range or the bass lines?
yeah, definitely. Especially, I got the classic rock education. My favorites early on: John Entwistle, John Paul Jones, of course, Paul McCartney. Got a little cheap Rogue violin bass in high school and tried to pretend like I was Paul McCartney for a while. One of the first real bands that I was in high school was called Real Lunch, um, which was the name came from a hybrid of Real Love, the Beatles song, and Naked Lunch by William S. Burroughs. Terrible band name, but we had some pretty heady ideas at that time. But that was a very Beatles influenced band. So I went to school on the whole Beatles catalog, learning all those lines. Of course, being in jazz band, I was studying what Mingus was up to. I was always a big fan of the Bill Evans trio, Scott LaFaro, Paul Chambers. So never really could wrap my head and hands around the upright bass necessarily, but definitely took a crack at a lot of that kind of style. But for me, things really started to click once I discovered progressive rock and jazz fusion. So of course, went into the Jocko thing head on, like many bass players do, and never come back from. And then Genesis, Rush, but for me, it's really yes, Chris Squire is like still my all-time favorite. So that's when I really started playing with the pick and kind of experimenting more with effect pedals and tone and just how to really get something more forward and punchy out of a bass.
Yeah,
So,
Chris was
yeah,
awesome. You ought to check out my interview with Chris here on For Bass
yeah,
Players Only.
yeah,
He was. I met him at Bass Player Live, and we hung out. And then it was actually a phone interview, but yeah, I got to see him live with Steve Howe and I said with Alan White, and I don't remember who else was in the rest of the band. And then I saw later after he had passed with it was Billy Sherwood playing bass.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah, actually, I interviewed him once or twice also. So,
Nice.
what about, okay, so musical upbringing, and you mentioned
Mhm.
trumpet and tuba, brass, and then you came down to the low end and you
Right.
started bass. What about the point where you actually started doing gigs and playing bass for money? What was that? How did that all happen?
Yeah. So that band, Real Lunch, really, it was made up of four really serious guys. So we were playing shows all summer long at the
I'm
local
sorry, excuse me.
VFW.
You were about how old at this time?
Oh, this would have been junior, senior year of high school. So getting 17, 18, 19. So we're
Old
playing
enough to
local.
drive, old enough to
Yeah,
borrow the car.
old enough to borrow the car for sure. Playing, Battle of the Bands and local VFW gigs and things like that. And then as we get closer to 21, we're starting to play the bars. And we ended up, I don't remember how we got our first gig there, but we ended up playing two shows at the Metro in Chicago. And that was like a big, big deal. The Metro is such, everyone in that band is huge Smashing Pumpkins fans too. So like to play the Metro and just be on that stage, it was, a real big moment for us. And so I wouldn't say necessarily we were making money at that point, but we realized like, hey, we're pretty good at this. We can, kind of start to get to a certain level of professionalism here. Um, that band eventually petered out as, folks moved to different cities and went to college and all of that. But a lot of those same friends eventually circled back around for Bad City and bands beyond that. So
So you grew up in Chicago or around
grew up
Chicago?
in the suburbs of Chicago. Yeah, northwest suburbs, Arlington Heights. Went to Wheeling High School, and then I went to DePaul University for college. So moved into the city for college, and then never left.
My son lives there. In fact, my wife and I were just there a couple of weeks ago. Went to Wrigley Field for the first time.
Nice. That's
So
always fun.
the Cubs had such a great turnout for being in last place, you know.
Yeah. Hey.
And I had never been to Highland Park. He doesn't live
Yeah.
there, but we have some friends there, and boy, I really liked that.
Yeah. It's a
And
nice.
Chicago's got obviously such a rich musical heritage, including some pretty good bass players who came up.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. A lot of, and right now the music scene is exciting too. There's always, just a good lifeblood here. So lots of great venues. Some of the great venues close, but new ones pop up, and there's always something happening here. So
I don't know. Have you ever crossed paths with Frank Russell or Bill Dickens or look, Daryl Jones, who's playing with the Rolling Stones now?
no, I can't say I have, unfortunately.
Okay. Well,
Yeah.
they're a little bit older.
Yeah.
So tell me about Serek Basses.
Yeah. Well, so just, after college, did the Bad City thing for a while, and we can go into that if you want, but basically toured around with some of the bands that you had mentioned during your intro. And as much fun as that was, and as successful as we were to a degree, I started realizing that the band life wasn't really for me. Being out on the road was just not kind of connecting with my soul. It's just an anxious time. It was hard to be away from home. If you've done any touring, it's just not always a glamorous lifestyle. It's hard to make money. It's hard to stay healthy, et cetera, et cetera. So, and also, not to say anything bad about my bandmates, but when you're in a band, your whole life is sort of beholden to the members of that band, especially when you're on the road. All the decisions you make, it's a group effort. Every decision affects everybody in the group. And I started craving some more independence. I was really just feeling kind of stifled, and not necessarily creatively, but just, I don't know, I just kind of wanted to do my own thing. I've always been a little bit more of a lone wolf. And so I started to kind of break away from that. And during the tail end of Bad City, I had a notebook. And as we were, be out on the road or in the studio, there's a lot of downtime. So I started sketching instruments. I'd always sort of had a propensity for making Frankenstein basses out of parts, and, hacking up old basses and
I have one
putting,
3 feet away from me.
yeah, it's great. It's fun. I have one P bass body at the shop that's been through like 6 different iterations of paint jobs and pickups and bridges and all that. So I kind of had that in my back pocket as well. I always did my own setups on the road and string changes. We never had techs or anything like that. So I was just very much into the gear side of things as well. So I thought like, hey, let's maybe give this a go. My dad was a handyman. He taught me, some woodworking skills. I took a wood shop class in high school. So I had sort of a little bit of carpentry here. I had the musical knowledge. Thought maybe if I can kind of combine the two, maybe I can create something. So yeah, I think it just came from years of collecting different instruments too, and just realizing the shortcomings of certain instruments, but then also trying to like really solidify a vision for an instrument that I would really want to play. And it just started to slowly build momentum from there.
Well, I saw a few names on your list of artists on your web.
Yeah,
Derek Frank, who I just interviewed a couple weeks ago.
great guy.
Mike Gordon. I can't remember if I interviewed him or not. And
Yeah.
sorry, Mike. And Tim LaFave and Dan
Yeah.
Haynes, who I also interviewed. So there must be something that these people like about your basses. Tell
Yeah.
me about the basses themselves. What makes them
Yeah.
stand out? The wood, the hardware, the necks, the whatever.
So you mentioned that I worked for Lakeland for a little while. Um, I loved working there. I had, learned a lot.
What's the guy's name? Piricelli? John Piricelli? Is that his
Yeah,
name?
so he bought the company from Dan right around the time that I actually left. I was only there for a couple of years as mostly an intern and sort of a shop assistant while Dan still owned the company. And I was sort of under the tutelage of Kevin Caton, who was the shop supervisor at the time. And Kevin and I actually went and started our first wood shop together once he left Lakeland. He builds some of the most incredible acoustic guitars I've ever seen. So check him out. But yeah, so having worked there and seeing the level of quality, but also I was noticing there were a lot of Fender sort of lookalikes out there on the market. And that's not to say there's anything wrong with that. I love Fender basses. I have an old 70s P bass, Takai hard puncher P bass. That's still like my favorite thing ever. I have a medium scale Squire P bass from the 80s that just absolutely kills. It's like the gold standard of basses, but it's been done and it's being done. So I thought, let's stay away from that. Like I don't need to just go in and create more Fender like instruments. So I started to think about all the other instruments I had owned throughout the years, different short scales and just kind of oddball guild basses and weird Japanese brands and stuff like that. So I started to just put together sort of my best of. And I thought it would be important, seeing the success of companies like Lakeland and Sadowski and all that, it certainly doesn't help that it certainly doesn't harm them that the basses they're making are already familiar to the customers. You see a Lakeland and you go, oh, I've seen a bass like that before. I've seen Stingrays and P basses and jazz basses. So this isn't so foreign to me. So I wanted to sort of make sure that the instruments I was designing had that same sort of familiarity to them. So the Midwestern, which is very much an Epiphone Newport sort of inspired instrument, was the first one that I really went after. And that's probably the most familiar of all of our instruments in terms of just looking like something else. But then I also went in with the Sacramento pretty early on, which was sort of my Rickenbacker inspired design. And then as I was getting started, I noticed I didn't really set out to particularly build short scale instruments primarily. It was just something I wanted to do for myself. But then that's what everyone else kept requesting. So that really kind of like put my foot in the door, like, oh, hey, this guy's doing something a little bit different. He's building short scales that look like these old basses, but don't necessarily sound or feel or play like them. And, given that those instruments can sometimes be hard to wrangle into playing in a professional atmosphere. So it was sort of this like vintage aesthetic and sound meets modern quality and feel that really kind of put it all together for me.
Curious about something because you heard me mention at the beginning. I'm just playing around with what did I say? Silver aged vintage or something.
Yeah.
Bass Players Only is a
Yeah.
bass instruction site, and most of the people that I'm attracting happen to be mostly men, but we do get a fair bit of women. But most
Sure.
everybody is in their 50s, 60s, 70s. I've got students in their 80s.
Yeah.
A lot of times the things that come with being of that vintage are arthritis, tendonitis, things like that, and a lot of them have found that short scale basses really help that. So I'm just
Absolutely.
curious. You mentioned you I think you were like one step short of saying you specialize in short scales. I don't know if that's an accurate statement or not, but
Yeah.
I'm just curious about the reason. Is it because it's easier to travel with, or is it because it's easier on the hands and the body, or is it
all
something
all
else?
of that plays into it. It's definitely, it can be all of those things, and it is all of those things. For me, starting out, just exploring new tones, trying to find the one that so I picked up an Epiphone Newport at a shop in Seattle. I didn't buy it because it was like $5,000 or something, but it was this vintage Epiphone Newport with just like the classic Bakelite mudbucker. and it had absolutely no high end frequency. It was all just like 100 and below, just like dubby, woofy submachine. And but it just felt so great. And I'm almost 6 feet. I'm not like a short guy, but I don't have huge, enormous hands and all that. And I had been playing my Rickenbacker and a couple of other, a P bass and some bigger basses on tour. And I was noticing like it was definitely weighing down on me too, literally and figuratively. So when I found that little Epiphone Newport, I picked it up. It was like 6 or 7 pounds. I was flying all over the neck, and it was just like, so maybe can I get something that's comfortable and lightweight and easier for me to play? Can I get it to sound like the basses that I?
Oh, did I lose you there? It's gonna knock on my screen here. Hello, Jake, are you there? Are you there? Oh, it's still rolling. Don't you love when this happens? Oh, you're back.
Am I still there? All right. Where did
Made
you
a
lose me?
gesture, and it looked like you wanted to punch me or something. That just
I was rambling. Where want me to start back?
about 30 seconds back.
Yeah. So, I'd been playing Rickenbackers and P basses on the road, but I found this Epiphone Newport and loved the feel and the weight of it. So I thought, could I get something like this to sound like the basses that I love? And that's been the quest. So I think a lot of, I know a lot of my customers have come to me because we make lightweight instruments, because the short scale is easier on their wrists and hands. But I've really made a point to make sure that these instruments don't necessarily come across like short scale. The reputation of short scales has been, that they're cheaper, they're budget instruments, that maybe they don't sound as thick and full as what a jazz bass or a P bass. But I'm, set out to prove that that's not necessarily true. So.
Well, some of the people that I don't know if they're just trying to be tactful or diplomatic, but they say the short scales have that nice little thump to them. I don't know. It sounded genuine when I've heard
Yeah.
that.
Well, there's something to that too. So one thing I also wanted to lean in and emphasize that, hey, short scales actually have something to offer that the traditional long scale basses don't. Going back to the Beatles, all those records that were played with the Hofner and stuff. So like that type of sound sits in a mix completely differently. It's a little bit
Is that
harder.
a short scale bass, Paul's Beetle
Yeah,
bass?
the Hofner violin bass, certainly. Absolutely.
So how
Jack
many
Bruce.
inches would that be?
I think I'm pretty sure Hofner's 30 to 30 and a half, the typical short scale. Yep. Jack Bruce and Cream playing the EB3. So those instruments record in a different way too. They can be a little bit harder to kind of like wrangle the low end live sometimes because they do get so boomy, but on a record they cut through really, in a special way. The Fender Mustang is another example of a bass that records really, really well. So there's something too about just having a short scale in your arsenal. If you're a studio musician, if you're in the studio a lot, it can really be another, color on your palette.
Never thought of that. So what
Yeah.
about things like pickups and hardware on
Yeah.
your
Yeah. So having worked at Lakeland, they always used hip shot, especially the ultralight tuners. So I was very familiar with those and always loved those. So it was kind of a no-brainer for me to work with hip shot. And they were one of the first people I met and called out when I first started the company to
great
try.
people? Josh
Great.
Boris.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And meeting them at the NAMM shows and stuff, it's just been great. So I use a lot of their 2-point supertone bridge, which was designed as a replacement for a lot of the early Gibsons and the Epiphones, like the Newport I had mentioned, the ones that were one piece bridges with just sort of like the bar going across, no intonation, no movable parts or anything like that. The 2-point supertone was built as a replacement so you could get individually adjustable saddles from an intonation and action standpoint. And when I first met the guys over at Hipshot at the NAMM show, they were like, you order a lot of those. Like I think you might be one of the only builders who's using that bridge on new instruments. Like we didn't intend for that to happen, but they were like really thrilled that I was using that design. I just because I love the look of it too, but it's a great bridge as well. So Hipshot was a no-brainer. Curtis Novak was one of the first folks I met in the industry, and he took over sort of the Bisonic pickup, tutelage lineage, if you will. I don't know if you're familiar with the Hammond Dark Star. Fred Hammond was
Ed
building them.
Hammond, yeah.
Yeah,
He
so
plays. I thought he plays a Ken Smith bass, doesn't he?
I'm not sure actually. I'm not entirely sure. I've never met him, but so
The
back
gospel guy, right?
I I don't know. I actually don't.
Oh,
I'm not sure if he's also a musician. There's an
oh,
interesting story there where he
maybe
kind of
there's more
dropped.
than one Fred Hammond in there.
Well, back up on the Bisonics for a little bit. That it started off as a Hagstrom and Guild pickup, and you can go back to some of the early Starfires and the early Hagstrom basses, Vikings, and things like that. Phil Lesh had them famously in his EB3 bass. So I always really liked that sound. And when I worked at Lakeland, they were using a reproduction of those old pickups made by a gentleman named Fred Hammond, who I've never met.
Huh.
But right around the time I left Lakeland, Fred Hammond sort of just disappeared, and nobody really knows. I'm not sure if anyone knows exactly what happened to him. I'm not sure if he's still alive. I don't I don't know. So if someone wants to do some research, but Curtis Novak out in California, he's out in the Joshua Tree area. He picked up the Bisonic thing and is making one of the best pickups out there. So I use a lot of his pickups. But early on, it was also important for me to try winding some of my own pickups. I really wanted to sort of take a stab at that. One of the Puricelli brothers, Bo,
I'm
over at
sorry, that
Lake.
just doesn't sound like fun to me. But
So it's interesting. Bo Puricelli over at Lakeland was winding a lot of pickups for the Lakeland basses, and I went into his little broom closet of an office one day, and he showed me how he did it, and that kind of like sparked something in me. And so I picked up a little Shatton pickup winder off of Craigslist, and you just sit there with the bobbin of wire and go like this for 15 minutes. But putting my first pickup together, wiring it up, plugging it in, and hearing that it actually made sound and not too bad of a sound was
yeah,
a huge inspiration, a huge confidence boost. And it gave me the ability to shape the tone that much more, because you can build the instrument, you can choose the woods, you can choose the hardware, but ultimately the pickup and the strings are going to have a really, really large impact on the tone compared to those other elements. So being able to wind my own pickups was really important to me, to be able to control the sound as well. And then from just a purely sort of superficial standpoint, I always loved the look of the dog ear P90 pickup that you see in a lot of those early Epiphone and Gibson guitars. And I thought, why can't this be a bass pickup? So we made the B90, and on and on.
well, I learned something from Mike Tobias one time, and he said that I guess certain pickups will, I don't know, the kind of wood that the bass is made out of and the kind of pickup, they some pickups will pick up the sound of the wood, which I guess is what you want, and other pickups will sound the same no matter what kind of wood the bass is made of. That was like 35 years ago. He told me this. That sound about right, or did I?
Yeah, once you get into that world of pickups and electronics, it really is a black hole, because there are so many variables and it's so hard to isolate them and be very scientific about it. Just on the pickup side of thing, you have magnets, you have wire, and you have the construction, the bobbin, the material you're using for the physical structure of the pickup, and then the type of pole pieces. Are using poles with large heads or small heads or blades, or there's different apertures and stuff. So just right there, you've got 3, 5, 6 elements of variability. Then you've got how you mount it to the instrument itself. Is the pickup mounted directly to the body with screws, so it's kind of like vibrating as one, or is it floating, sort of mounted on a pick guard? Is it, you go on and on. So it's really hard to sort of find capital T truths in any of that. I've found in my experience, with the variables within what the materials and elements that I use, I've found, what works and what doesn't with my instruments. But speaking on a larger scale, on the macro level, is kind of hard to.
When you're talking, I'm picturing a Strat. And
Yeah.
was it an accident, or did Leo Fender go, hey, what if I put this bridge pickup on an angle where the other two are straight?
Yeah. No, that's all. I mean, Leo was definitely by far and away, but he pushed the advancement of electric guitar technology more than anybody else. He
Yeah, I
designed,
think most people would agree with that.
and I mean, it's crazy to have such big inventions on the guitar side of things and the bass side of things, and with all three of his companies. You're talking Fender, you're talking Music Man, you're talking GNL. They all have like, you know, pantheon level instruments in that he invented and, designed unique pickups for. So it's pretty incredible. He definitely knew something. He had some
Yeah.
special sauce there.
You
So
mentioned G&L. I was there one time a few years back, and I was taking the tour of the place, and there was a room, and there were these ladies winding.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
It's like, okay, I'm sure a machine could do that, but there must be something about the artistry, that I
Yeah,
love.
I mean, there certainly is. I think, especially in the guitar world, when you're talking about picking up treble frequencies, there's much more nuance there. There's much more going on with overtones and harmonics, and so that's when I think the hand scatter wound stuff really speaks through. In my experience, having done it both ways, where I hand wound all our pickups, and now I've got a small sort of CNC pickup winder that keeps things a little more consistent.
Yeah.
I'm going for the consistency over the hand wound stuff when it comes to bass. It's much more important to have, to know that you're going to get the same resistance and the same,
Sure.
the pickup that you expect to get every time. So,
Do you have a special string that you put on your basses, a particular brand?
as a musician, when I was touring around, I always loved DR high beams. It's a
Uh-huh.
steel round wound. But to me, they're not as harsh as other steel. Like I played roto sounds and some other steel strings that really chewed up my fingers and felt very sort of stiff and high tension. DRs have something sort of supple about them. They're a little bit slipperier. They mellow out beautifully, but they still stay somewhat, zingy for a long time. So that's always been my favorite string, just from a personal standpoint, from a player standpoint. So that's what I have stuck with for the round wound side of things. When it comes to flats, I use Dunlop flat wounds. They have the Super Brights, which I love, and I have a great relationship with the folks over at Dunlop.
Like an oxymoron, super bright flat
Yeah,
one.
absolutely. Yeah, totally. But I'm overall a round wound guy. So for me, like, I love flats, but I don't want them to be like tape wounds, like super dull and thuddy. But I love labellas. I've had, great experiences with it. GHS makes some really great stuff as well.
Yeah, 100,
Um,
miles from where I'm sitting right now in
yeah,
Battle Creek, Michigan.
nice. And I love they are like the best when it comes to the in-betweens, the pressure wounds and the ground wounds. And that's an area that I hadn't really explored until the last year or so. Actually, Mike Gordon plays sort of ground wound strings. He's kind of right in the middle there. And he was using Ken Smith strings for a while, which I believe, and I'm not sure if I'm supposed to say this or not, I believe GHS was making those sets for Ken Smith, but they make a great set of ground wounds. That's just really, really nice. It's
Funny
really
because I
interesting.
used to play Ken Smiths exclusively. You know why? I like to slap, and I liked to. This is back in the '80s, so I
Yeah,
played
yeah.
all kinds of shows and theater and concerts and everything. But the G string was a 44, not 45.
Huh. Interesting.
Somebody said you can feel what was it, like a thousandth of an inch? I thought, I don't know when you get that. I,
Yeah.
I
Sometimes it's sort of an instinctual thing, if it's just not what you're used to,
you know,
that's another, thing with short scales that a lot of folks have to get used to. It's a different, even if you're using the same gauge string as you would be on a long scale, the tension is going to be lower on a short scale. So that's something that, can take a little getting used to, or, when if folks are sort of on the fence about should I go full short scale, I often ask them how heavy they play with their right hand, if they're using a pick, if they're down tuning at all. These are all considerations. So
this is such a niche thing we're talking about.
I
Sometimes
get in.
I find myself saying, I must be a real bass nerd or geek because this stuff really excites me. This
It's fun. I mean, it's fun. I think it's funny because at the end of the day, so I play in a cover band here in Chicago. We play street fests and weddings and things like that. And I often think about how much thought I've put into building my instrument, choosing the pickups, choosing the strings, then choosing my amplifier and my speakers and all my pedals. But then ultimately, I'm going out to the front of house, and the sound guy is going to do whatever he's going to do, and he's going to compress the crap out of my signal, and then it's going to be coming through this whatever speakers they have on whatever state. There's just so many different levels
Oh,
that it's fun to get into the weeds, but at the end of the day, it's just bass. You just want it to sound good. You just want to be able to feel it while you're out there. And the average, show goer isn't going to be really cued into the the minutia of it.
that's why a lot of people like the Sans amp, Tech 29.
Yeah,
You ever fooled around with those?
yeah, absolutely. Yeah, yeah. And I've recently also gotten into the HX Stomp pedal, just in terms of going more with like more of a direct sound, the line six stuff. So
There's a question I like to ask, and I think you'd bring an interesting perspective to this, given your background, not just as a player, but as a builder.
yeah,
What about the people that are coming to me? I've got people from pretty much every state in the US, and I don't know, 50, 60 countries last time anybody counted, probably
yeah,
more than that now, coming to For Bass Players Only every day to learn how to play bass. And I
yeah.
gave a little bit of context of, who I'm attracting. I thought I was going to get the 20-year-olds and the 50, 60, 70, 80-year-olds, but they're not trying to become professional musicians.
Sure.
You know what? They want to get together with their friends and play some classic rock riffs or some blues shuffles or maybe
Yeah.
some walking bass. And actually, a lot of them, which surprised me, um, are happy to just stay at home and sit in a room and learn bass and practice. But
Yeah. I
but
get that.
no, I'm just trying to give you as much context as I can. I mentioned the arthritis and the tendonitis. So taking
Yeah.
all those things into account, what advice could you impart to somebody like that who wants to learn to play
Yeah.
bass? What would
You
you
know,
advise them?
that's a great question, and that's a tough one. I mean, having fun is paramount. You got to enjoy it. And so when I think about having fun, for me, it started with learning to play the songs that I loved and heard over and over again. So like it doesn't have to, I think it's a worthwhile endeavor to start at sort of the beginning, as it were, of electric bass, which going back to classic rock, Motown, a lot of that early stuff, when you could really start to hear when bass came to the forefront of recorded music, electric bass, so to speak. I think it's important to sort of get that foundation, but ultimately, like, play what is going to excite you and keep you interested. If you don't want to play Led Zeppelin bass lines, then you don't have to necessarily do that. I think building up muscle memory in the left hand is really important. Well, if you're a right-handed player, that is. There's, I think a lot of, speaking from experience, but also having taught a little bit myself and just, seen various different levels of bass players, I think we get hung up on the right hand technique a lot, especially if you're playing with fingers. It can be really weird to sort of build up that sort of alternating finger thing and figure out how to just like get a consistent sound. But a lot of that actually happens with the left hand, as I'm sure you know. There's so much muting you can do. There's so many, little slides and hammer-ons and pull-offs, all just the little like techniques that really bring flavor and nuance. And I think if you can focus in on that, plus learning your shapes, learning your pentatonics and your scales and everything, it just opens up a world, for you that wasn't possible before. So I think,
Oh, I lost you again. I thought you were going deep in thought. You can't hear me now, can you? Hello. That's a great expression on your face, I think. You're deep in thought. There, you're
are we
back.
back? Sorry about that.
Best thing I heard you say is I think, and then you had this pensive look and you were like,
Oh man,
and for a minute
I,
there, I didn't know I lost you. I thought you were thinking.
I was going on a long-winded thing there, but basically you got to have fun with it, but you also have to know your basics. You have to know the language and just your basic shapes, because that's just going to allow you to do so much more. If you want to go visit a foreign country, if you learn just a handful of phrases while you're there, it's going to open up so many doors for you. You're going to, just feel like you're more a part of it. It's the same thing with learning an instrument. So, yeah.
Good advice. Thank you. What about you in the future? You've done a lot. You're still young. You've got a lot of energy. You're a player. You're a builder. You're a smart guy. You know a lot of things.
Yeah, I appreciate that.
What is there something that either you have planned for the future or something you've always wanted to do and haven't gotten around to yet? What's in store
Yeah.
for the future?
Well, so actually, I haven't made the announcement yet to the social media world and everything, but I believe by the time this airs next week, you said that it should be out there. Anyway, we're my wife and I are moving away from Chicago, so moving out of Illinois for the first time. We bought some property down in North Carolina, Western North Carolina, in the Asheville region. It's been a long-standing dream of mine ever since I started this business, really, to be able to have my own shop on my own property. Uh, Renting commercial space in a big city like Chicago it's a daunting and often soul-crushing endeavor. But we've also just, we're nature lovers. We love hiking and biking and kayaking, and so my wife and I decided to make this change from sort of more of like a life perspective, a holistic, life perspective, knowing that if we're happier with our environment, then we'll be better at our jobs. And so I'm very much looking forward to starting my shop, rebuilding my shop down there from scratch. And I think it's just gonna, the business really isn't going to change a whole lot for the time. We're still going to be building the same models that I have and taking orders in the same manner that I have been. But I'm really looking forward to a new environment and how that's going to impact the creativity in the process. There's going to be a whole new set of local woods to choose from and just different, different inspirations. I'll be working in a much different environment. And I don't doubt that that will have very beneficial impacts on my creativity and just sort of productivity. So really looking forward to that.
Oh, that's very exciting.
Yeah.
Well,
Yeah.
do you have a date when you're going to be moving?
Yeah, so well, we're actually moving the house down this weekend, but I'm hoping, this is wishful thinking maybe, but I hope by around September, October of this year, I will have my new shop humming along again as it was here. So right now it's in sort of a state of disarray, but yeah, it's sort of a multi-step process getting it down there.
I'm sure you already know this, but it's going to be in disarray for a little while.
Yeah, I think so.
Well, that's very exciting.
Yeah,
Congratulations and good
thank
luck
you.
to you.
Yeah,
I have one more question for you,
sure.
Jake. What would you be if you were not a bass player or a bass maker or something outside of music?
It's a great question. I've the running joke at the shop for the past few years has been that one day I'm going to close the doors to the wood shop and I'm going to start a pasta sauce company. And it's just, I don't know where that started. It's just been sort of a joke, but I really do think that I would do not necessarily something food related, but I would stay in business. I would open another small business, but I would do something more small scale, something, building bases is great. And I love getting up and going to the shop every day, but there's a lot of moving parts. There's a lot of equipment. There's a lot of pieces to the puzzle. I think I would simplify and just do something where I'm making this jar of whatever it is and I'm putting it on the store shelves and, hopefully it'll, still feed people's souls in a way. Yeah, I think that's the answer.
Oh, that's cool. Maybe you want to collaborate with Michael Anthony from Van Halen. I
Oh
interviewed him.
yeah, there you go.
He's got his hot sauce.
That's right. Yeah, that's right.
Last, last I
Yeah,
checked, my interview with him was up to 1.3 million views.
nice. Very nice.
Yeah, but we talked
Yeah,
about hot sauce. Well,
awesome.
you've got a great story, Jake. Congratulations on everything, and
Yeah,
not only your accomplishments, but I'm genuinely excited for you and your wife for the future. I know you're going to continue to do big things and good things.
absolutely. Yeah, thanks for having me, and yeah, appreciate it.
Thank you. Much luck and continued success to you always.
All right. Thanks.
You're watching ForBassPlayersOnly.com. I'm John Liebman, founder and first baseman. If you've ever wanted to learn bass, but you feel like you might not be able to, or you can't because of your age or your body or something that's standing in your way, you should know that right now there are thousands of people inside the For Bass Players Only community. A lot of them over 50 and a lot of them older than over 50. And they're learning bass, they're playing music that they love, and they're having the time of their life. You should come join them and experience that incredible transformation for yourself at ForBassPlayersOnly.com. I will see you. Oh, I almost forgot to say, as I always say, you're never too old to groove. So let's play bass. I knew there was something missing there. I will see you right back here next week, same time, same place. Thanks again to my special guest, Jake Serek. And I'm John Liebman. Let's play bass.